In the last few years, we've been hearing more about food fraud. Sometimes this results in higher prices or prices that are too good to be true, and some cases have resulted in health impacts to consumers like allergic reactions or health complications. In this series, we'll talk to Kathy, John, and Yaxi about food fraud and how it's addressed in Canada. We'll start by asking, what is food fraud?
For the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's purposes, food fraud means intentional or unintentional misrepresentation of food. It can occur when a food is misrepresented and can have economic and sometimes food safety impacts. And some types of food fraud include substituting a product with something of a different character or quality, adulterating or diluting a product by mixing in with other ingredients or elements and not declaring them on the label, mislabeling that a product is something that it is when it isn't, and in that sort of category as well, making false claims or misleading statements to make the product appear to be something that it's not.
Well, I think Kathy has covered the broad range of the issues in there, and certainly the false claims or misrepresentation of products such as USDA organic or halal and kosher. All of these are called credence claims, and a credence claim is something that a consumer cannot verify before or after purchasing because they don't have the skills or knowledge to do that.
One more thing I want to add is, so usually when we say something is fall in the food fraud issue, we think the practice of this fraudulent is made specifically for economic gain. And that's usually, especially I think in academia, we sometimes interchangeably use the term food fraud with economically motivated adulteration.
When food is misrepresented, it could be food fraud, and we'd like to know what products can be affected.
Food fraud isn't a new problem, but the concerns around food fraud are growing, and this is on a worldwide basis. So food fraud is often reported in products that have a complex global supply chain, that are expensive, that are easy to adulterate, and also products in which adulteration is not easy to detect. So some of the most common global examples of high-risk foods include, but of course aren't limited to, olive oil and adding less expensive oils to it, honey with addition of other sugars, dry spices that could contain bulking agents, colors, or flavors, fish species substitution, fruit juices that might be diluted with other juices or water or undeclared colors or flavors, and organic food products, as John mentioned, mislabeled and misrepresented. And as well, there can be document fraud.
With these known examples of food fraud, how can we detect when there's a problem?
Techniques for the detection of food fraud can generally be categorized into two groups. One type is techniques based on the molecular information, and the other is based on the chemical composition. So for the analytical methods based on molecular information, the methods are kind of similar to the molecular tests that have been widely used during this pandemic time to detect the virus. So in food fraud analysis, the molecular tests are designed to specifically analyzing the food ingredients, which are, most of them are originated from biological species such as plant and animals. So on the other hand, the chemical composition-based methods, we try to differentiate fraudulent food and the authentic food by analyzing some of the smaller size chemicals, for example, the sugar content for honey and the lipid composition for olive oil.
There are a couple of ways to test for food fraud. One is to look at DNA in plant and animal products, or if there's no DNA, like in olive oil, then you can use chemical analysis. As these methods are under development, fraudsters are looking for ways around the tests, so there's more to looking for food fraud.
Yeah, well, as Kathy alluded to, food fraud detection is often very difficult to detect, so there's a low probability of detection. I think that would be generally accepted. So outside of the targeted inspections, we can also detect food fraud through mislabeling. We're actually quite lucky that the bad actors make spelling errors and they make smudges on labels, so there can be an indication that something is wrong. by looking at a label. Customer complaints is another way where a brand may get an advisory from a client that there's something wrong with the product. If they get that product back, they can test it. And what's often most underrated is market surveillance. So I was advising a global rice brand about 3 years ago and advised them on protection and detection of their rice on global markets. Well, I was quite surprised to learn 2 months ago that hundreds of tons of their rice was actually sold in Europe, Canada, and the US, and they didn't know anything about it. It was a criminal organization from Bulgaria that sourced rice from Ukraine and other countries and completely falsified the branding and labeling. So we don't have the governance in place yet to detect all of that. But when I am talking to brands, I tell them that they need to be vigilant on global markets. The Australian government, for example, knows that they have a problem with fake Australian beef on the global market. It's estimated to be between 2 and 4 billion Australian dollars. That's quite significant. So market surveillance is crucial.
Food fraud can be substituting one ingredient for another, adulterating without declaring the ingredient, mislabeling, or making misleading statements about a product. Consumers sometimes cannot verify the authenticity of their products by themselves. It takes the cooperation of consumers, producers, and regulators to uncover food fraud. Join us in our next video about the impact and response of food fraud in Canada.